McCulloch versus Maryland is one of the first significant cases in the United States dealing with the clarification within the Constitution. The U.S. Constitution was ratified in 1788 and written by the Founding Fathers of America, replacing the Articles of Confederation. In 1789, George Washington was inaugurated as the first President of the United States of America. The Secretary of Treasury at that time was Alexander Hamilton, who proposed creating a national bank to regulate American currency and deal with national economic problems. However, the Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, opposed Alexander Hamilton's idea to create a bank. Jefferson feared that it would usurp the power of various states and concentrate it to a dangerous degree in the central federal government. Disregarding Jefferson's concern, Congress created the first Bank of the United States in 1791 with a 20-year charter. The creation of the federal bank provoked controversy, causing the creation of the Federalist Party, who sided with Hamilton, and the Democratic-Republican Party, who sided with Jefferson. In 1811, the first bank's charter expired and was not renewed. The second Bank of the United States was created because of the national economic problems caused by the aftermath of the War of 1812. The U.S. government only owned 20% of the bank's equity. Some states had passed laws designed to hinder the bank's operation, while others just tried to tax it. In 1818, Maryland state legislature passed a law levying a $15,000 annual tax on any bank operating in Maryland, issuing notes and bills that were not properly stamped by the Maryland's Treasury. James William McCulloch was a cashier at the Baltimore branch of the Second Bank of the United States. McCulloch issued an unstamped banknote to Baltimore resident George Williams. McCulloch versus Maryland was filed by John James, an informer who sought to collect half of the fine proposed by the state of Maryland. McCulloch and the bank were represented by Daniel Webster. The case was appealed to the Maryland Court of Appeals, and the state of Maryland argued that the Constitution is silent on the subject of banks. Maryland's contention was that without specific constitutional authority for the federal government to create a bank, that any creation would be rendered unconstitutional. The court upheld Maryland, and the case was then appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court reviewed the case in 1819. Justice at the time was John Marshall. Marshall first argued that historical practice establishes Congress's power to create a bank. He invokes the creation of the first Bank of the United States as authority for the constitutionality of the second bank. Marshall secondly rebutted the argument that states retain ultimate sovereignty because they ratified the Constitution, arguing that it was the people who ratified the Constitution, and not the states. Therefore, the people, not the states, were sovereign. Marshall then addressed the scope of congressional powers under Article I, broadly discussing Congress's power. Marshall admits that the Constitution does not enumerate a power to create a central bank, but said that it is not dispositive as to Congress's power to establish such an institution. The fourth argument Marshall addressed was by invoking the Necessary and Proper Clause. The Necessary and Proper Clause gives Congress the power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. In simple terms, this permits Congress to seek an objective while it exercises its enumerated powers, as long as the objective is not forbidden by the Constitution. Maryland attempted to argue that the word necessary in the clause meant that Congress could pass only laws that were absolutely essential in the execution of its enumerated powers. Fortunately, the court rejected that argument on the grounds that many of the enumerated powers of Congress under the Constitution would be useless, and only laws deemed essential to a power's execution could be passed. Marshall also argued that the Necessary and Proper Clause is listed within the powers of Congress, and not its limitations. Marshall determined that Maryland cannot tax the bank without violating the Constitution, since the power to tax involves the power to destroy. The court struck down the tax as unconstitutional in violation of the Supremacy Clause. The Supremacy Clause establishes that the federal Constitution and federal law generally take precedence over state laws and even state constitutions. The majority opinion stated that Congress has implied powers which must be related to the text of the Constitution but do not need to be enumerated within the text. Implied powers are those that are not written but can ultimately be assumed, while enumerated powers are written. The court ruled 7-0 in favor of McCulloch. This case was significant as it was the first that touched on federalism. Federalism is the balance between federal powers and state powers. Not everyone agreed with this ruling, as Marshall rejected the 10th Amendment provision of states' rights, arguing that it did not include the word expressly. Another theory also argues that the federal government is a creation of the states, and therefore the states should maintain superiority. Marshall's successor, Roger B. Taney, established dual federalism, in which separate but equal branches of government are believed to be a better option. The case of McCulloch versus Maryland proposed a steady growth of federal power.